Fires are raging in parts of France and Spain, and the images are, as some evacuees have put it, nothing short of apocalyptic. Hundreds of thousands of residents have been forced from their homes in both countries. The turbulent blaze near the western French city of Bordeaux is creating its own winds and sparking fresh fires and even fire tornadoes. And the worst might not be over. A new heat wave is predicted to arrive this week in both France and Spain, and that's threatening to complicate efforts to extinguish the wildfires. Now, some have called these blazes unprecedented, but are they really? Wildfires have become an unfortunately common reality of European summers now, and as man-made climate change continues, are they going to get worse? I'm joined now by the world's foremost expert on the history of fire and humanity's relationship to it. He's also the author of the book Undying Fire, A Fire History of Europe, in addition to many other works on the subject. Stephen Pyne, thank you very much for joining me.
My pleasure.
So authorities in France are saying that the wildfires are unlike anything that they have ever seen in the country before. From what you've seen reported, are the French wildfires really at the level that we can call unprecedented for Europe?
Well, I think they're unprecedented for certainly recent decades. I try to avoid the word unprecedented. I would say they're historic. They may be monumental, but unprecedented. Europe has had fires since the Neolithic. The story has been one of fire embedded in an agricultural landscape. And you get wildfires when those landscapes, that agricultural landscape, is no longer being tended because of war or famine or plague, whatever. So we have a different setting sort of contributing to these kinds of fires, and they look a lot different, but I would not. So in that sense, they are unprecedented, but I would say historic. They're big, they're dangerous, they're tragic.
So let's keep our focus on the history of it for a second. You've argued that humanity has created a new age of fire, a Pyrocene era. What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, I think we are replacing the serial ice ages that have dominated Earth history for the last 2.5 million years, the Pleistocene, with a fire equivalent. We've been in an interglacial for the last 10 or 12,000 years, but I think through a series of sort of nudges and tweaks, humanity has been altering the conditions that would permit the ice to return, and we are replacing it with a sort of fire equivalent. So changes in sea level, mass migrations, biogeographic mass extinctions, biogeographic shifts, climate change, all these sort of features of ice ages are now, we can find analogs in fire. So I think that when we talk about adapting to fire, yeah, there are different levels, different scales at work, but I think ultimately we're talking about adapting to a fire age.
So if I understand you correctly, managing blazes like this will just become part of humanity's relationship with nature moving forward. Do you think we're prepared for that?
Well, I hope we don't continue to do this. There are a lot of mitigations that can apply. Ultimately, we have to rein in our capacity to warm the planet, and that means shutting down fossil fuel combustion. But a lot of that's locked in. We're going to be dealing with it for a long time. There are lots of things we can do. It's really one of many paradoxes that are going on, is that these really large, damaging fires that even threaten or get into communities, even cities, are a pathology of the developed world. I mean, this is something, those places that have the most science, the most technology, the greatest wealth, the most fire expertise, in a way, are the ones that are being clobbered. So there is something fundamentally wrong with how we are living on the land. We have not considered fire in all of its manifestations, not really appreciated what's going on. It's something that's been treated as a seasonal phenomenon, not something that's systemic. We react to it as an emergency instead of thinking about it as a problem of how we live on the land, what the landscape looks like. I mean, how did Europeans, particularly in the Mediterranean, survive for thousands of years in an extremely fire-prone area? Now it's ramped up, of course, by global warming, but it's always been fire-prone. How did they do it? Well, they did it by cultivation, taming nature, taming fire, living within it, within those constraints. We've removed all of that. Part of our conversion to a fossil biomass society, if you will. We found alternatives, and now it turns out that fire isn't going away. And we've made it worse. We've taken our best friend, our ancient companion, and made it our worst enemy.
So it sounds like, if I understand you correctly, that the current firefighting efforts we're seeing in Europe are treating the symptoms, but not the underlying cause. So do you think we need to rethink our relationship to forests in the natural world and maybe how we cultivate them to prevent disasters like these in the future? Is that correct?
Well, that's correct. And I don't want to dismiss the firefighting. It needs to go on. But under these extreme conditions, and the fires that really matter are the ones that are in extreme conditions, and they're the ones that are becoming more prominent. Those are beyond our capacity. And to pretend that we can bomb them away with more air tankers or engines or crews is not going to happen. So we need to do that. And perhaps improve it, but ultimately these will only get worse, and we have to rethink the landscape itself. Europeans had a mosaic landscape, mixtures of fields, pastures, orchards, lots of things going on with fires. Their tame fire is a part of that. We're not going back to those kinds of conditions, but land abandonment has left the land to go feral or to be converted into a wild state or converted to industrial forest plantations, all of which aggravate the fire scene. So those are targets we can do while we try to ratchet down global warming.
Now, we've just been seeing some images of firefighting efforts in Spain and France, and you spent a lot of summers as a wildland firefighter in the Grand Canyon National Park. Help us get a grasp of what the firefighters in both countries are going through trying to battle these blazes.
Well, you really need to ask the people on the ground. I spent 15 seasons on a fire crew for the National Park Service, 12 as crew boss, and our specialty was initial attack. We were in wildland settings, very few roads. It was just finding the fire was one of the major skills. It's a very different kind of engagement with fire, but it did give us a feeling for fire. We didn't see fire on the crew as an enemy, something we didn't hate it. We weren't determined to wrestle with it. Fire made our life there, which we enjoyed, made our life there possible. And so we animated fire. We wouldn't personify it, but we animated it, and it was sort of part of our landscape. And so that's very different than what's going on now in France and Spain. These are really savage fires. The best you can do is to try to keep people from being killed on the fire line and to protect what kinds of structures you can and evacuate people where possible, get them out of the way. These fires are not going to be stopped until they run out of stuff to burn or the wind dies down.
Now, you used a really interesting word there. You said personification, and earlier I heard the French Minister of the Interior say something also interesting along the same lines about these fires. Let's take a listen, and I'd like to get your reaction to that.
It has a life of its own. It takes advantage of the climatic conditions and the density of these forests to have a completely erratic behaviour. It's autonomous, it feeds on itself and spreads in all directions.
Now, we've heard this multiple times. It has a life of its own, or the fires seem to have a mind of their own. What exactly do you think he meant by that?
Well, I can't speak for the minister. I think it's very common for people to attribute kind of living qualities to these fires, that they're a beast. or to personify them. I try to avoid personifying, but it is an interesting question whether fire can be regarded as alive. And there are people, serious observers, who believe that's appropriate. My sense is it sort of depends on what you mean by life. I think of fire as kind of a virus. It's not itself living, but it requires the living world to spread, to propagate. It's completely dependent on, it's different than, say, hurricanes or ice storms or other floods, all of which are substances. Fire is a reaction, and it cannot exist apart from the living world. Life created the oxygen, life creates the fuel. In the form of humans, life supplies most of the ignition. So it's really, it lives, there I am, it occupies a kind of nether world, living and not living, which makes it a very interesting phenomenon.
Well, it certainly is. It's fascinating. And in this current situation we're dealing with, European Union officials are worrying that these blazes might not be put out for months. Why exactly is it so difficult to extinguish them once these wildfires have started?
Well, they put out a lot of energy, and they put it out over a very large area. And you control fires by stopping their spread. And that can mean a very large perimeter. And once they're large, you can't sort of put them out. They're not like a campfire that you can just pour water on, or even a house fire, or building fire that you can tear the building apart and scour through for embers and the rest. You're talking about thousands, tens of thousands of hectares, and that's impossible, anything apart from the perimeter. And if there are deep organic soils or large logs down in the ground, these can burn for a very long time and contribute a lot of heat and make it difficult. So I would be surprised if they last for months unless the weather conditions continue. They will continue until the circumstances that sustain them disappear.
Now, you spoke earlier about some of the things we need to do to mitigate these type of fires moving forward as we continue into this Pyrocene era, as you've called it. And we can't turn back the clock on climate change in the short term. But finally, I'd like to ask you, are there any countries or regions taking the right steps to manage these fires moving forward?
Well, if you think about fire, if you take a fire-centric, pyrocentric perspective, and you think about the fire problem systemically, no. We live in an era of polycrises now. Certainly Europe is being hit, but you've got war on one end, you've got economic crises, you've got now climate crises, you've got multiple issues going on, and fire can be dismissed as just a temporary eruption. Here we have this flare-up, this kind of insurrection occurring, and we'll eventually tamp it down and deal with all these other issues. So no, but I think that instead of imagining a ministry of fire with a €1 trillion budget to deal with fire problem systemically, you need $1 trillion euro budget for infrastructure, landscape infrastructure, to rebuild it and redefine the conditions under which fire occurs. What would be the modern equivalents for that mosaic and varied landscapes that historically allowed Europeans, even in the Mediterranean, to cope with fire? How can we sort of rediscover our relationship, our own cultural fire heritage, and begin working with fire to limit the bad ones? Good fire rather than bad fire. It's a simplistic formula, but that in a way is where we can go. There are a lot of things we can do, a lot of little things you can do to prevent some of the worst damages. Ultimately, we have to wrestle the global warming and climate change issue together. But in the meantime, there are lots of small things we can do that would improve our ability to adapt. Much like air conditioning during heat domes, there are sort of fire equivalent on landscapes for air conditioning projects. So it doesn't solve the problem, but it allows you to get through it for a while better.
All right, so it really does sound again like humanity needs to do its homework. That was fire historian Stephen J. Pyne. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
So what do you think? Are we prepared for more fires like the ones currently devastating France and Spain? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for joining us.